To my beautiful friend Des, I hope this piques your interest. You melt snow in hearts. You're a true ray of light in this world. I love you to the moon and back. Alright, picture this. The heaviest armed ship in the entire world. A floating city of cannons. This thing wasn't designed for speed. No, it was designed for pure domination. See, while other navies were building ships to run, Spain decided to build a fortress meant to crush anything in its path. We're talking about the Santísima Trinidad, a ship that wasn't built to sail gracefully, but to absolutely overwhelm its enemies. 140. Just let that sink in. That's how many cannons this monster carried into its final battle at Trafalgar. Now, to give you a little perspective, the legendary HMS Victory, she had 104. So yeah, this number alone is what made the Trinidad a legend and an absolute terror on the high seas. And that right there, that's the whole point. Her entire design philosophy was just different. You had the English building these sleek, race-built ships meant for long-range gun duels. Think of them like boxers, jabbing from a distance. But Spain built this, a high-charge floating fortress. It was designed to get right up in your face and win a street brawl. So you have to wonder, how in the world do you even start building a monster like this back in the 18th century? Well, let me tell you, it was nothing like what we do today. This was true seat-of-the-pants engineering. It was more of an art form, really, built on knowledge passed down through generations from master to apprentice. And the contrast is just fascinating, isn't it? Today, we build these huge ships using pre-made blocks, like a massive, high-tech Lego set. It's all super precise and modular. But back then, forget about it. There were no detailed blueprints. The shipwrights were working off experience, maybe some scale models, and just an intuitive feel for the wood. They were creating these gigantic, almost organic structures from scratch. And the sheer scale of the materials, it's almost impossible to wrap your head around. To build just one ship, the Santísima Trinidad, the shipwrights needed something like 2,800 oak trees. And not just any trees, we're talking century-old oaks. So you weren't just chopping down some timber, you were literally harvesting an entire forest for one ship. And hey, to all my environmentalists and tree lovers out there, I hear you. I know this part can be a little hard to sit with. We lost some truly magnificent ancient forests, and that matters. I'm just here to tell the story, not celebrate it. So bear with me. And they were incredibly picky about their wood too. This wasn't just grabbing whatever was nearby, it was a seriously sophisticated global supply chain, even back then. They needed strong oak for the keel, the ship's backbone, for the curved ribs, and this is amazing. They didn't bend the wood. They actually went out and found compass oak trees that had naturally grown into the exact shapes they needed. Then, for the hull planks, they'd import this premium straight-grained oak all the way from the Baltic. And for the towering masts, you needed the lighter, more flexible pine and fir. The basic process, when you break it down, sounds pretty simple. First, you lay the keel, that giant spine. Then up go the frames, the ribs, and suddenly you have a skeleton. And then, finally, you attach the outer planking, which is basically the skin that holds it all together and, keeps the ocean on the outside. Okay, but here's where the story takes a really interesting twist. The Santísima Trinidad wasn't actually launched as that 140-gun monster she's famous for. Nope. She started her life as a powerful ship, for sure, but a much more, conventional one. And that's the million-dollar question, right? Because her transformation tells us so much about the escalating arms race of the time. And it reveals a really clever and, frankly, pretty risky bit of engineering. So if you look at how this happened, you can see her power just kept growing. She launched as a really strong but pretty standard 112-gun ship. But then, as the naval arms race heated up, she got an upgrade to 130 guns. And then, around 1802, she reached her final terrifying form, 140 guns. This was no accident, folks. This was a deliberate strategy of we will not be outgunned. So, what was the secret? How did they pull this off? Well, it wasn't some huge complicated redesign. It was actually a brilliantly simple and honestly audacious modification. The shipwrights looked at that open-air deck on top, the spar deck, the one that sits between the raised bits at the front and the back, and they just closed it in. They planked the whole thing over, creating one long, continuous sheltered deck. And just like that, they had, for all intents and purposes, created a fourth gun deck. This was practically unheard of. It let them cram dozens more smaller cannons into a space that was previously just open to the sky. But as you can probably guess, all that extra power came at a very steep price. I mean, adding an entire fourth deck packed with heavy iron cannons, that puts an unbelievable amount of stress on a wooden hull, and it completely changed how the ship handled in a fight. See, the biggest enemy for a long, heavy wooden ship is this physics problem called hogging. Just imagine it. The middle of the ship is buoyant, but the bow and stern are hanging out there with less support from the water, so they naturally want to droop. Now, add the weight of 140 cannons on top of that, and you are seriously risking the ship just snapping its own back. So how did they stop that from happening? Well, the solution was ingenious. They used these super thick, reinforced bands of planking called whales. You can see them running the length of the hull. They basically acted like giant ligaments on the outside of the ship, or like the hoops on a barrel, just holding the whole thing together under incredible tension. It's what gave it the strength it needed to not break in half. And all of this whole design, it really points to a massive difference in naval strategy. The Spanish were perfecting what they called the high-charged vessel. It was, for all intents and purposes, a floating fortress. Those high castles were perfect for Marines to fire down from, great for boarding actions. The English, on the other hand, they went with the race-built ship, a sleeker, low-profile gun platform that was all about speed and maneuverability. And these comparisons really lay it all out. The Spanish design, immense, durable, built to carry troops and win by boarding. The downside, that high profile basically acted like a giant sail, which made it sluggish and easily pushed sideways by the wind. Now, the English design was fast, it was nimble, perfect for those long-range gunfights, but that lighter construction could be a real problem if you got stuck in a close-quarters brawl. And inside this floating fortress, it was basically a self-sustaining city at sea. You had a crew of over 1,000 men, so she had to carry enough food to last for 6 months and enough fresh water for 3. You can just imagine every single square inch below deck was crammed with barrels and supplies, all to keep this massive war machine running when it was far from home. So what's the legacy of this totally unique ship? Well, in a way, she represents the absolute peak of a certain type of naval strategy, right at the exact moment that strategy was about to become obsolete. I mean, she really was a magnificent beast, wasn't she? A perfect symbol of 18th century ambition and just a true marvel of wooden engineering. There was absolutely nothing else like her on the entire planet. But you know, her story is also kind of a cautionary tale. She was the ultimate expression of a strategy that bet everything, and I mean everything, on raw, overwhelming power, sacrificing speed and agility to get it. Sure, that made her feared, but in the fast-paced, fluid naval battles of the Napoleonic era, it also made her a huge, vulnerable target. When you look at it, the numbers really tell the tale. 36 years of service, almost 3,000 ancient oak trees, a crew of over 1,000 souls, and that final mind-boggling number, 140 guns. Her full name, by the way, was the Nuestra Señora de la Santísima Trinidad. She fought like hell at the Battle of Trafalgar in 1805 and was eventually captured by the British, but she was so battered, so completely broken, that she couldn't survive the storm that hit right after the battle. She sank, taking her one-of-a-kind legacy down to the bottom of the sea. And that story, the story of the Santísima Trinidad, leaves us with a really fascinating question. One that's just as relevant today as it was back then. When you're faced with a disruptive, changing world, is it better to double down and perfect the old strategy you already know? Or do you risk it all on something completely new? I hope you enjoyed this deep dive back into history. Here at Galaxy Mega Builds, it was a joy making this, and honestly, learning right alongside you. We will eventually cover the 7 wonders of the world, but to me, we have so many more wonders in this world, and that includes you. Like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time.